Today's story is written by Mike Langer. I hope you all will check out Mike Langer's YouTube channel. I'll put a link in the description below. He also has a full compilation of all these Morana Air stories, which you can check out on his channel. The corporate offices of Morana Air are the furthest one can get from a professional environment. From the few employees that do show up, most arrive at work an hour late and spend most of their morning smoking and chatting in the parking lot. The break room is filled with half-empty liquor bottles. The fridge smells like a morgue during a heat wave, and there's loose pills sitting in one of the kitchen cabinets. You'd never guess that Morana Air had daily flights from just about every major airport in the Northern Hemisphere. No one in the office is a day over 30. Everyone seems generally confused about what their actual job is, and I wager a solid half of the employees are under the influence of something. I have no idea how the service is on their flights, and I don't care to find out. But the state of their offices definitely reflects in their tax documents. When I first arrived at Morana Air, the receptionist nearly had a panic attack. No one told her about the audit, and she had no idea who to contact about it. With some convincing from my side, she let me set up shop in an empty conference room that smelled of spilt beer. Then she left. When she returned, nearly half an hour later, her eyes were pink with calmness. I was allowed to work out of the conference room, she said, but everyone in charge of records was out sick for the week. I would have to find whatever paperwork I needed myself. Whatever words of protest I had fell on deaf, stoned ears. In all my years conducting audits, I had never witnessed a business this disorganized. My first day at Morana bore no fruit. After a search that took the better part of the afternoon, I found the CFO sleeping under her desk. She had braces and messy hair, and no idea what her job description actually meant. Once I explained to her who I was, and re-explained to her who she was, the CFO joined me in searching for the elusive financial documents. We made our way through the entire office building. The CFO moved with no urgency whatsoever, and seemed wholly annoyed with my presence. Yes, there was a records room somewhere, she claimed. Problem was, she couldn't remember where. Nothing approaching financial records showed up on our search. Instead, we found a game of poker, a bunch of employees drinking cooking rum, and a maintenance closet filled with rags that smelled overwhelmingly of sweat. Since the CFO couldn't remember what parts of the building we had searched, we found the maintenance closet twice. The CFO went home early that day. So did I. When I reported Morana Air's inability to assist with the terms of the audit, my boss told me he would run the complaint up the chain and get back to me. I wasn't excited about the prospect of going back to their offices, but I figured there was nothing left there to surprise me. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The CFO was beyond frustrated to see me in the lobby the next day. She told me that this was her first job out of uni, and that she didn't really know what she was doing, and that she'd appreciate it if I just covered for her. When I reminded her that I was an auditor and not her friend, the CFO rolled her eyes so hard it looked as if she was going through a petit mal seizure. The CFO strolled through the office and asked every employee we met if they knew where the financial records of the company were. When no answers were provided, and the CFO grew tired of me following her, she started to take extended bathroom breaks. She'd excuse herself to go to the bathroom, hide in it for 20 minutes, and then look extremely disappointed when she found me standing outside waiting for her. It was on the third of these prolonged toilet breaks that I noticed the door. Financial reports, read the sign next to it. I was sure it was the maintenance closet with the strange rags. The air outside the door smelled gently of sweat, and I had been familiarized with the closet twice before. Yet, as the minutes outside the bathroom dragged on, I found myself less confident. Out of duty and partially out of boredom, I opened the door. To my surprise, I was not greeted with a pile of filthy rags. Instead, in front of me, sat a tight, dim hallway. For a couple seconds, I searched the walls for a light switch, but then I realized that the fluorescent lights above me weren't off. They were still flickering, just very weakly. I chalked up the busted light bulbs to more ineptitude, and let the door close behind me. The topography of the hallway seemed wholly nonsensical. The number of sharp turns I made through the jagged path seemed more reminiscent of a maze rather than an office. Something at the pit of my stomach was telling me it would be wiser to turn back and retreat to where the lights still worked. The prospect of spending more time with Morana Air's CFO, however, was irritating enough to keep me walking. I made my way through the winding hallway until it opened up to reveal a room full of filing cabinets. Again, something at the base of my spine told me that something was wrong with the room. It might have been the menagerie of dead plants sitting on top of the furniture, or the office chairs randomly strewn around the room, or that the gray carpet was filthy with spills and mud and footsteps. It might have been any of those things, but the filing cabinets, their mere existence, they made me ignore my gut. The plastic labels on the filing cabinets were hard to read, but when I found one titled Q1 through Q3, 15, I reached out and pulled the metal handle. The cabinet didn't budge. Instead, I found the tips of my fingers covered with a lukewarm, transparent slime. I tried to wipe it off on the edge of the cabinet, but my hands only got stickier in the process. It's in that moment, with the strange goop dripping from my hand, that I decided to go back to the CFO. My discomfort about that room had manifested itself into action. It's in that moment, just as I was getting ready to flee the strange back room of the office, that I realized there was no escape. The hallway that had led me to the room was gone. It took less than a minute for the panic to set in. The room of filing cabinets was big, but not big enough to hide the hallway that I came in through. The only exits that led out of the room of filing cabinets led to rooms with empty cubicles. With my clean hand, I reached out for my phone. I wasn't sure if the stoned receptionist would pick up my calls, but that quickly became irrelevant. There wasn't a single bar of signal on my phone. I kept composed. I had no idea where I was or how I would get back, but I kept composed. I did multiple circles around that room, looking for the tight hallway that led me there. When that provided no results, I called out, casually, if anyone could hear me. I was doing my best to keep composed, but my will was starting to slip. I was desperate enough to scream. Just before I lost all composure, though, I heard it. A flute. Barely noticeable beneath the flickering of the fluorescence, coming from one of the office rooms beyond. I heard a quiet flute. The song it played lacked all melody or rhythm, and once again I found goosebumps springing down my back. But with nowhere else to go, I followed the flute. The faint music led me from one room of cubicles to another. With each doorway that I passed, the workspace got more and more disorganized. Where once the cubicles sat in orderly rows, they were now scattered across with no rhyme or reason. The air had turned humid and hot, and sweat started to crawl down my back. I was as careful as one can be when I took off my jacket, but I still managed to dirty it with the strange goop that was on my hand. I was sweaty and scared, and the office around me was starting to look like it had been hit by a tornado, but I kept on following the toneless music in front of me. When I finally saw the flute player, my stomach urged me to stop once more. This time, I listened to it. The cubicles were all pushed to the edges of the room, giving the man with the flute ample space for his performance. His face was wrinkled with effort, and his hair was messy and gray. The man was a janitor, or at least he wore a uniform that would suggest that job. When I saw him, I almost cried out for attention, but that eerie feeling of something being wrong gave me pause. In that pause, I saw the flute player's audience. Immediately, I ducked behind one of the turned-over cubicles. A fresh crop of sweat flushed through my body. For a moment, my rushing heartbeat overpowered the sound of the flute, but the instrument quickly grew in its volume. I tried to convince myself that I was just seeing things, that I had done nothing but stumbled upon a man poorly playing the flute in the back room of an office. One peek from behind the cubicle dispelled all of my doubts. What I was seeing was far from normal. What I was seeing was beyond the scope of comprehension. The janitor was playing his strange flute song to an inhuman audience. At first glance, they were simply filthy rags strewn across the floor. But with each note of the monotone music, the crusty pieces of cloth moved. Like tiny dancers, they spun and hopped in unison with the rhythmless tune. My mind was already on edge from my strange environs, but the sight of the dancing filth sent me over the edge. I clenched my fists and stifled a scream. At first I managed to smother the shriek, yet one look at my hand forced a terrified groan out of my throat. Where the goop had once been translucent, it had now filled up with specks of grime. Just as the change in the slime hit me, so did the smell. It smelled of aged sweat, just like the rags in the maintenance closet. My hand was starting to tingle. With each note of that shrill flute, the grime on my hand pulsed with unexplainable energy. As the rhythm of the janitor's music sped up, so did the grip of the sludge on my hand. With each note, it squeezed harder and harder, until, just before its grip became painful, the ooze of filth jumped from my hand to the shaggy carpet of the office. Like a being with a mind of its own, it crawled through the gray carpet, leaving behind a trail of grime. When the maddening, dark blob pulled itself past my hiding spot, I felt the gentlest breath of relief. With my body tucked away behind the cubicle, and the strange slime off my skin, I could at least pretend that my circumstances were slightly less maddening. For a moment, I felt the slightest pang of relief. It only lasted for a couple of notes. Without warning, the strange music of the flute came to an end. All that could be heard was the flickering of the spotty fluorescent lights, and the sound of wet rags shifting.
"Hello? Is anyone there?"
yelled the janitor. His voice was gruff, and held no trace of friendliness.
Come out immediately. You don't belong here."
A part of me wanted to cry out to him. A part of me wanted to hold on to the idea that the janitor was someone who could get me out of these strange back rooms. I wanted to have hope that he would lead me out of the hallway so I could escape the Morana Air offices once and for all. But deep inside, I knew the man meant me harm. Suddenly, the janitor's composure broke. He started to scream. With a furious and vulgar zeal, he threatened to murder me unless I showed myself at once. His threats barely connected into words. The pure rage in his voice stole away all meaning and turned into human barks. As terrifying as his threats were, the janitor's constant screams gave me clear indication of where he was. He was searching the other side of the room. I decided my only chance of escape was to sneak out while the murderous man was searching elsewhere. The moment I tried to move my feet, however, I found myself stuck. My heels were fused to the floor. The shaggy gray carpet had intertwined with my shoes, and made any movement with them impossible. The janitor's shouts were getting closer. With no time to spare, I ripped my feet out of my shoes and crept away from the violent threats. I managed to follow the wall to an exit from the room, but I could still hear the janitor's nonsensical fury. The positioning of the cubicles in the next room was like that of a maze, but I did not concern myself with the details of my environment. I simply moved quickly and silently between the plastic walls, in hopes of not being murdered. I was well inside the maze of cubicles when he found my shoes. It seemed like the janitor's fury was at its zenith, but when he found concrete evidence of my existence, he screamed even louder. He said that when he would find me, he would crush my skull. He screamed that I had ventured into a place that no one was to know about. I moved even faster. When I was sure he wasn't behind me, I started to run. Adrenaline was surging through my body, and I was already drenched in fearful sweat. But the further along the maze of plastic I ran, the more it became clear that the floor was wet as well. The deeper I ventured into the back rooms, the louder the squishes of my footsteps became. I paid no mind to the nature of the floor, or the rhythm of my heart. My focus was wholly on getting as far away from the mad janitor as I could. His threats were terrifying, yet the more I ran, the fainter they became. When the janitor's cries were no longer audible, I breathed a sigh of relief. When the plastic walls of the cubicles parted to remain a familiar, tight hallway, That sigh turned into a cry of happiness. The carpet had turned into a puddle of God knows what. My chest ached with exhaustion, and I was drenched in sweat. But the tight hallway seemed familiar enough to give me hope. After a couple turns of the corridor, though, my heart dropped once more. I heard the shrill notes of the flute again. They weren't coming from a specific part of the office. The terrible rhythmless music permeated from the walls themselves. I continued walking, trying to ignore those terrible notes that danced around me. The music, however, was not the only thing that scared me. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the eye. I thought that maybe through the sheer exhaustion of my ordeal, I was just seeing things. But after a couple of the strained notes, I knew I could lie to myself no longer. The ceiling of the office was dropping lower and lower with each note. The hallway was closing in on me. I hoped that each turn through the jagged path would be the last, but the corridor shrunk before me without an exit. It wasn't just the ceilings of the hallway that were changing. With each corner I rounded, the floor grew wetter and wetter. The carpet was no longer gray. A thick layer of grimy water rendered it jet black. As the ceilings grew too low for me to sprint, I started to feel something tugging at my feet through the black water. When the ceiling grew low enough for me to have to crawl, I was certain of it. Each note of the shrill flute was accompanied by a tightening of the carpet. It was as if the hallway itself was trying to trap me. With each note of the flute, the grip from beneath the lukewarm water grew tenser and tenser. I heard the janitor again. He screamed vulgar threats between each of the notes. He described, in detail, how he would break my bones and rip out my tongue if I was ever to tell anyone what I had witnessed in the hallway. He threatened to brutalize my body if I ever escaped, so I crawled through the dark sludge as fast as I could. There was scarcely room for me to crawl when I finally saw the end of the hallway. There was no door. Instead, there was a mess of cloth gathered at the end of the corridor. The cloth moved much like the janitor's eldritch audience, and from beneath the water I could feel tendrils of something cold and malicious reaching beneath my fingers. The air reeked with ancient sweat, and my mouth tasted of battery acid. The sight of the squirming wall of rags made my stomach turn, but I knew that the janitor would not spare me if he caught up with me. Gathering every ounce of courage I had in my drained body, I launched myself into the wall of filthy cloth. The smell was overpowering, and the rags reached out from my body like malicious tentacles. As I crawled through the shifting mass of filth, the flute and threats grew more distant. I crawled and I prayed and I held my breath, until I could crawl no more. My skull hit something solid. Before panic could wholly consume me, I realized I could stand up. It took me a mere second to find the door of the maintenance closet. I found myself standing in the familiar, well-lit offices of Morana Air. I did not stay long. Shoeless and covered in grime, I sprinted out of the building, got in my car, and promised to never return again. I've been reassigned from the audit, but I doubt my boss believed a word of what happened to me. He kept on saying he would send someone else to do the job, that Morana Air would be forced to cooperate with the audit eventually. I don't know what fate awaits whoever comes in next week in my stead. And honestly, I won't allow myself to worry about that. I'm just happy. I'm just happy I escaped the back rooms of Morana Air. Hey everybody. There's another story coming up next, so I hope you'll stick around for that. If you enjoy the channel and you haven't subscribed yet, please just take a second and click the subscribe button. It really does help out a lot. I was checking recently and saw that almost half the people who watch the channel aren't subscribed yet, so if you haven't, I hope you'll take a quick second to hit that subscribe button. Okay, thanks for listening to my shameless plug, and now on to the next story. Susan, I want this email to remain between the two of us. I know you like to gossip, and I saw that r/anti-work post you made about Charlie. But please, Susan, don't tell anyone about this email. I don't know who else to go to. You're the only person whose private contact I have, and If I went to HR, I'd get fired. Or worse. Susan, I saw something tonight. I stayed at the office late after everyone left, and I saw something I was not meant to see. I saw something incomprehensible and mad, and I'm in danger. You're the only one I can turn to. You're the only one I can trust. Susan, the janitor threatened to murder me today. He threatened to murder me, and it is only under the promise that I wouldn't tell a soul that he let me go. He let me go, but I can't stay silent. We both know no work is ever done at the office. People just clock into Morana to drink and smoke and look busy. I've heard someone say that it's just because we're a regional office that's used for tax breaks. We're not. I checked. We're the corporate headquarters of an airline that has daily flights in every major city in the world. Susan, have you ever seen someone call a customer? Have you, in the past 6 months, seen anyone do any work at Morana? No, you haven't. That's because we're not doing any of the work. We're just cover. We're just cover for what happens in the offices during the night. We're just tiny pawns in something bizarre and dangerous, and today I saw things as they are. If anyone else at Morana finds out that I saw what I saw, I'm as good as dead. So please, Susan, I beg you, don't post any of this to Reddit. So, some guy from sales has a birthday party. We celebrate at the top floor, then celebrate a bit more at the bar across the street. By the time we get back to the office, I'm real hammered. Heard that serious-looking audit lady is back, so I hide under my desk to keep out of sight. I figure I'll sleep it off and then wake up around 5, go get something to eat, and go home. I didn't. I woke up in pitch darkness, curled up beneath my desk. I was still pretty hammered, but the moment I came to, I knew where I was. I could also smell a familiar stench. You know that supply closet full of rags on the second floor? The one that everyone complains about because it smells like ancient sweat? That smell. I could smell that stench inside my cubicle. Susan, this is going to sound so absurd and obscene. I promise this isn't some sort of sick prank. I swear on my life I'm not making this stuff up. There was a pile of rags sitting in my chair. It's only thanks to the few rays of light from the street lamps outside that I could see the thing, but I was certain. Sitting behind my desk, shaped like a man, sat a pile of those sweat-stained rags from the supply closet. They were typing. It was typing. The smell, the shock, the amount of tequila I drank for lunch, it all caught up with me. I needed to vomit. But I was scared that the thing, that creature that was sitting behind my desk, typing away at my computer, I feared it was sentient beyond office work. I feared that it would do something to me. The air smelled like barf in a hot car, Susan, but I stayed put beneath my desk. I stayed put and prayed for the world to return to normal, or for me to wake up in my bed with the whole smelly rag affair just being a byproduct of my drunkenness. My prayers weren't answered. For what felt like an hour, I stayed curled up beneath my desk, holding down nausea and trying to control my breath. I feared that I would be stuck in my delirious predicament for the whole night. But then I heard the shrill notes of a flute. Walking between the cubicles, with no rhythm and no set melody, someone was playing the flute. The moment the first notes of that cryptic song could be heard, the mess of rags that was typing at my desk stood up. With wet, squelching footsteps, that being walked off into the hall. Seizing my chance of escape, I crawled out from beneath my desk and took a peek out of my cubicle. The mess of rags was not alone. It was joined by other clumps of filth and sweat that shuffled their way to the center of the office. Walking among the cubicles, leading the procession of rag creatures, was... Susan, I know this all sounds like a joke. I know what I'm describing is wholly insane. But I swear I'm not making this up. I swear this is true. The janitor was leading the procession of rag creatures. The same janitor that hangs around the parking lot in the mornings. The same one that gets real aggressive if you complain about the mess in the supply closet. That guy who's a head taller than everyone else at the office and looks like he's just left a war zone. That same janitor was leading the march of the rag creatures with a flute. He played the flute off-key and out of rhythm, but the creatures following the grizzled man were dancing, or at least bobbing, to the shrill sounds of his instrument. He was walking up and down the office in slow, measured steps, and seemed to be completely focused on his music. As drunk and nauseous and terrified as I was, I saw my chance at escape. When the flute-playing janitor had turned his back to me, I rushed towards the staircase out of the building. I almost made it. I almost made it to the staircase and out of that cursed office. Yet rising to my feet was far too much for my drained body. Just before I reached the door to the stairs, I lost my balance and fell. I managed to hide behind one of the cubicles, but my landing had stopped the janitor's playing. Immediately, a flashlight was aimed in my direction. At first, the janitor called out into the darkness with some semblance of sanity. He asked me to come out of my hiding spot. He told me that no one is allowed in the offices after sundown. At first, his tone was reasonably civilized. But when I didn't show, when I didn't listen to his orders, the janitor lost his mind. His steady voice gave way to a flurry of violent vulgarity. The janitor screamed about how he would crush my skull if I didn't show, how he would cut up my body until I couldn't be recognized. I was nauseous and drunk and drained, but hearing the sheer madness of the voice approaching me, I knew I had to run. I leapt out of my hiding place and sprinted down the stairwell. I managed to make my way down the first staircase without stumbling, but by the time I reached the second set of stairs, my legs gave out. I fell down the stairs, and before I knew it, the janitor was on top of me. He lifted me up by my shirt and slammed me against the wall. For a moment, I was relieved that he had none of those terrible rag creatures in tow. My relief was misplaced. The janitor came down the stairs without the filthy demons, but he did have a knife. A big, dull combat knife that he pressed against my throat. His hands were shaking and his voice was manic. The janitor was clearly panicked, but I had no doubt he would end my life right then and there. He screamed about gutting me like a fish, about making sure that no one finds out what I saw. He raved and rambled about how my life was going to end because I had witnessed too much. The madness in his eyes, the blade, his fury, it was far too much for me to handle. I was so scared I puked. I puked on the janitor in fear, and I am certain that it's the only reason why I am able to write this email right now. The vomit tempered him. He dropped me and continued to scream at me. His anger, however, seemed more focused on me dirtying his uniform rather than me interrupting whatever horrid ritual I had stumbled into. Seizing my chance, I begged. I begged for my life, and I promised him I saw nothing. And I swore on everything that is holy that I would never tell a living soul what I had seen. At first, he was not convinced, but with enough tears, enough begging, and some dry heaves, he let me go. When he let me go, I thought that I would actually stay true to my word. I thought that I would get home and pass out and forget about the whole affair. But the longer I think about it, the more I consider what I saw. Look, Susan, this all seems insane, I know. I know getting this email in the middle of the night must seem like some unfunny prank. But I swear what I saw is real. The office we work in is a front for something horrid. Whatever work is done in the Morana offices during the night is a part of something terrible and inhuman. I don't know how I'll go into the office tomorrow. I don't know how I'll be able to pass by that supply closet and pretend it's not connected to some terrible ritual. I don't know how I'll carry on. Please, Susan, tell me I'm not insane. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward. And if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.